Hey people, this is Fernando. Welcome to another video for the Modern Survivalist. In this case, I want to talk about something I was thinking about this morning regarding the one thing that I always keep in mind regarding the one thing that gives you the edge, the one thing that makes a difference when some of the worst disasters, some of the worst crises, thinking of war, economic collapse, if it's famine, if it's a large-scale natural disaster, the one thing that makes a difference and that you should keep in mind is probably one thing least talked about when you watch many of the YouTube videos or read about preparedness, which is something that last time I talked about this with someone that thought the same way as I did. It was with Selko. Selko, from the Balkans. We were preparing this event that we unfortunately didn't get to do. It was right in the start of COVID. We actually had to make a call. We were talking with Toby, and I actually have to get in touch with those guys again. But we were organizing this event right in the start of COVID, and we had to make the call like, we suspend everything right now because people will not be able to travel. And in fact, that's what ended up happening. So we were in one of these many conversations preparing for the event, talking with Selko. We agreed that the one thing we all, both of us would have liked to, if we could go back in time, the one thing you want to do is just not be there when it happens, which is pretty obvious when there's some horrible event, when there's some, not just minor inconvenience or even a localized disaster, but something that's going to be life-changing, long-term event. Then you just get yourself out of there, and even better, not be there at all when it starts. So if we analyze many of the things that have happened in recent years, if you think as of the war in Ukraine, just days before the mass attack on Kiev, that invasion that surprised the entire world. I mean, there was an ongoing war already closer to the border, but the idea of going straight for Kiev, it was being talked about. Some people were saying that, no, it could never happen. Honestly, I thought they wouldn't dare do something like that, but it was still in the table. There was an exercise in the border that made no sense with that massive number of troops in the border. And the attack eventually did come. Now, before that, days before that, people had already prepared. Many people had started to prepare. They had their suitcases. They had their family or friends or someone somewhere else to go. Now, this is a perfect example as of how timing matters, but also how not being there is the key. Now, of course, you may be thinking, well, if I leave and I get to the border and I cannot leave because male over 18 years old, you had to stay and fight. Now, if you left before that, you could have left, but maybe you have a commitment to your own values and your own sense of patriotism, and you plan on staying. This does not mean that you don't prepare accordingly, because if this is still a plan you may end up needing, but even if it's just a simple matter of getting your family out of the way. For example, right now, almost 10 months after that time, that initial invasion, you're looking at a country that has no electricity. You probably don't want to be there with your family. You want to get your family out of there. If you stay to fight, you stay and fight yourself, but without exposing your loved ones. If you think of even some of the events during the pandemic, now you're talking about a global event. Was it the same for everyone? Of course not. Some places did worse than others. Some countries suffered more restriction than others. In some countries, people were forced to make very serious medical decisions about themselves without having much of a choice. In some countries, depending on the line of work you had no option. If you were serving in the U.S. military, you were forced to get it, right? You didn't have an option. You didn't have a choice in that. So is that something that you still survive and get by? Right. But you were forced to do that, and either you lost your livelihood. I had these conversations for months with people that were sharing their experiences in the chat. Like, I work in this line, I work this and this, and it's either I get it or I cannot put food on the table at the worst possible time with an economy that it's a ruin. What am I doing? What, try find a new job in the middle of lockdown? Really, that's what I should be? Well, of course, some people had to make that decision. And it's easy to point your finger and say, oh, look at what you did. Now, it's easy for me, right? Because I wasn't in that position. But if you have a sense of empathy, if you understand that the reality of other people may be different from your own, then you go back to this. Best thing would have been to maybe not even be there. Now, what I suggest leaving the United States because you were being forced to get a shot or whatnot. Well, that's up to you. Maybe it's simply about moving somewhere else. Maybe it's a matter of changing your job or making some more local changes. Maybe changing state is something that is often brought up in terms of preparedness specifically in the United States for that sort of thing. You have the option of moving to a state that is more, pro-freedom, like Florida, right? This kind of strategy always makes sense. But it still surprises me that which is beyond any shadow of a doubt, the strategy that historically, for our entire species, for thousands of years, has been the most efficient way of avoiding disaster, which is simply not being there, is still so misunderstood. And people have different knee-jerk reactions of, oh, but this is my country, I'm never leaving it. Okay, you can always go back, you can move around, you're not a freaking tree that is planted in a specific place. So that argument, at least for me, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Then there's, of course, the aspect of what kind of quality of life do you really hope to enjoy for the rest of your days? Let's say you're living in the coast of U.S. Big tsunami hits, destroys everything. Oh, you're gonna be staying there in the ruins. You're gonna be living in the ruins in a shack built with the debris from the wave that destroyed half your state or maybe all you've ever known. Well, no, you don't do that. That's stupid. It doesn't make any sense. Do you stay as a country in the Middle East is bombed to rubble? Why would you ever do that? What benefit? Who's gonna be remembering your glorious death? Buried in a ton of rock. No one. What about your loved ones? Your kids? Your wife? Your children? Have you done them any favor? Of course not. But we go back to this topic, and it's still something that people struggle with a whole lot. It's one of the things that, though, I end up doing quite a bit of consulting when people ask me about these decisions, specifically giving their options, specifically giving their time in life, family situation, jobs, and yeah, that's something that I do every once in a while, and with good results. I've kept in touch with some people that years later told me, man, we're doing great. Thank you so much for the advice you gave us back in the day. And, life is good. They go on with your life. This is something that maybe people in Argentina, where I'm from, understanding a lot more. People that have gone through what I've gone through, surviving the economic collapse. My experience going through the economic collapse in Argentina. Book that has over 1,000 reviews. Book that is my account of something that 40 million other Argentines went through, just seen through my lens and the way I think about things, right? And the way I process these things. But 40 million people went through the exact same thing. Maybe not all of them made the same decisions in life, but we go back to that. How is it that you want to live? I mean, I've had family that moved out of Argentina and stayed out of Argentina. I have family that moved out of Argentina and went back because they just couldn't adapt to a different lifestyle. They had maybe a specific circle of friends and relationships and family and so on. And yeah, you give it a go, you try, it doesn't work for you, and with all the good and all the bad that it has, you still make that decision, right? And that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly understandable. But when I talk with Selko about some of the more, some of the toughest things that change your life forever, a good example of this, spectrum of things. Is it the same thing? War? Okay, specifically where? What part of the country are you in during this war? Are you in a better place? Are you further away from the example of Ukraine? Is just, there's so many lessons right there. For years, since 2014, the war was kind of like in the border. It was something that people in Kiev could look at, not as if it was another country, because it wasn't, but you could have looked at it as, well, that's happening on the border. They wouldn't dare do it. Well, yeah, it ends up happening. Things happen. Natural disasters happen. Horrible events surprise people. Fires destroy wooded areas. And if you are in one, then that's for you. That's the end of the world as you knew it until that point. There's so many accounts of preppers in the United States that moved to Oregon or some other homestead, and all of a sudden they end up losing their entire homestead and all their preps and everything they had, all their earthly belongings, all of their material belongings, because of a fire. And they're left with nothing because they couldn't simply envision the idea of, maybe one day I'll just have to haul and get myself out of here. It can happen to anyone. It is not something pleasant. Look, I have 3 books published, right? This is the one that is, has been around the most, and people use it as reference for economic survival, for economic collapse and economic crisis preparedness. Street survival skills also is something that people liked quite a bit in terms of the practical stuff. I promote these all the time. The 3rd book that I published, it was actually in the middle. It's this one, Bugging Out and Relocating. Bugging Out and Relocating is still, I'm super happy with it, but it's obviously just check the reviews. The number of reviews you have is a lot less than the other 2. And it's because, and at the same time, it's, at least for me, it's one of the more critical aspects of preparedness, which is having the option of not being where things have gone to hell. And yet, it is the book that has the least reviews. It is my least popular book. I mean, still, pretty successful for any publisher standard by any stretch of the imagination. But of the 3, the one that people hesitate the most when it comes to clicking on, throwing it in the basket and buying it. Because talking about this stuff is tough, is hard, and people don't even want to think about it. Now, many of the things that I end up talking with folks when doing consulting, a lot of it is in that book, in Bugging Out and Relocating. Of course, if you have certain specific personal situations, family, work, options because of countries that could be a bug out country for you eventually, or you are in a certain part that close to some border or whatnot. All of these specifics, you need more of a tailor-made evaluation of that. But at a very broad picture, the things that I explain in that book are the same. The idea is, as the title itself says, bugging out and relocating, not the same thing. Bugging out is the kind of thing you do more in a hurry. Relocating is the kind of thing you usually process a little bit more. Maybe you're not in so much of a rush. Now, it could also be the case that you combine the 2. You had some plan already in place. I'm living in Canada, right? I live close to the border with U.S. I see that I have someone that is almost like the son of Fidel Castro running the country like a dictator. He's already banning handguns. Who knows what he's banning next? Maybe I'm considering doing this. Maybe I'm considering crossing the border, going to U.S., living there. Maybe you have family, maybe you have friends, someone that could help you out, job, housing, whatever it is. Any little contact, any little help, friend, whatever it is, or even just having visited the place, visiting a town that you like across the border, and you talk with some of the locals. Maybe you went there on holidays, you spent some time, you talked with a real estate agent of that little town, and you got to know him, and he's someone that you have the phone, you could rent something else if you have to move there for a bit more of a longer, more extended holiday, let's call it that. Maybe you end up doing that, and you have your foot already on the ground, and you hit the floor running, so to speak. That is so much better than one day running in panic when they start kicking down doors and arresting people because of the kind of things they commented online. Which unfortunately is something that's already happening in parts of the world, like in UK, which is insane. But I've done videos of this already. You are arrested right now in UK if you post something that someone finds offensive online. This is not a misinterpretation of events or something that I'm just making up. You can look it up. I've published it in my channel before. A veteran British guy being arrested in his home because he retweeted, rearranged LGBT flags so as to represent another symbol that is actually quite accurate. Anyway, he just he retweeted something online that someone found offensive, and when he was being arrested, the police officer told him, when he asked, why am I being arrested? Because someone was deeply disturbed by something that you said or posted online, and they took him in cuffs. So if you combine that, with a current collapsing economy that you have right now in UK, you may be thinking about, maybe I go elsewhere. There's people that have already done that. I know that's the case. And is it something that it makes sense? Absolutely, it does make sense. Is it something that everyone should do? Of course not. Maybe your own personal situation is better. Maybe you cope and you accept that you're dropping from here to here and you're poorer than you were before. Maybe a lot poorer than you were before, but you're still okay with that because other things matter as well, and they do. Now, if you think of it in terms of a thing like a situation like the one in Venezuela, where you go like into this Argentina thing, but collapsing even worse, mixed up with socialism, actually more like a socialist dictatorship. Well, then you want to get yourself out of there before it's too late. You don't wait. And there's people like my friend Daniel in Venezuela, survivalists in Venezuela. 20 years later, man, I'm still here, and things are not looking good for me to leave now, because now it's a lot harder than it was before. The window of opportunity has closed so much that I just have a little gap. You can still do it, but it's going to be a lot harder. So prepare while you still can. Have these plans in place, even if you don't act on them, but you have it in your mind. You already gather the information, and you know what you could potentially end up doing. If you have more assets, if you have, you visited a place, you opened a bank account, you know one specific town or another. If you have all of these tools already in place, you are going to be in a much better position than the guy that didn't. And these are really the things that you want to keep in mind for all of the other stuff that are being told, having 10 years of food. There's no point in that. If you're going to be needing 10 years of survival food, you shouldn't even be there when you needed more than one. That's the lesson from Daniel in Venezuela. 2 years worth of food. He went through 2 years worth of food. He's still in Venezuela and still says, maybe I should have left before. When he could have sold the house, get more money out of it. It would have been better, right? But this is the lesson, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day. You have my books available below. See you next time. Take care.